Convict escapee finds millionaire passed out on a dirt road. But when she goes to help him, someone appears behind her and does something that shocked everyone. Rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. The asphalt burned beneath the bare feet of the 30-year-old woman who ran down the rural road as if her life depended on it. The orange prison jumpsuit, torn by the thorns of the dense woods, clung to her sweaty skin as the midday sun beat down mercilessly. For 3 days she had been on the lam since escaping during a prison transfer, and the distant sound of the search dogs still echoed in her ears like a nightmare that refused to end. Each step was a struggle against the despair that threatened to consume her. Wrongfully convicted of a crime she never committed, she knew she had little time before they caught her again. Thirst burned her throat, and her legs trembled with exhaustion, but the determination to prove her innocence kept her moving. She couldn't give up, not when the truth was so close to surfacing. It was when she spotted smoke rising from the side of the road that her heart pounded for a different reason. A luxury car was overturned on the shoulder, its crumpled hood smoking under the intense heat. For a moment she hesitated. Helping someone would mean exposing herself, wasting precious time she could use to get further away from her pursuers. But something stronger than the instinct for survival pulled her toward the vehicle. She approached carefully, her heart hammering in her chest. Inside the car, a man of about 30 was passed out in the driver's seat. Blood trickled from a small cut on his forehead, contrasting with his aristocratic features and the expensive clothes he wore. Even unconscious, there was something magnetic about his presence, an aura of power and sophistication she had never experienced up close. She reached out a trembling hand to check if he was breathing when a rough voice made her freeze in place. The farmer who lived nearby was standing a few yards away, an old but well-maintained shotgun pointed in her direction. His small, suspicious eyes examined her with growing recognition. "I know that face," the older man muttered, his voice laden with certainty. "You're on the flyers in town. You're the escapee causing all this commotion." Panic washed over her like an icy wave. She was cornered, with no way out, a wounded man in front of her and a potential captor behind. But it was in this moment of utter despair that the impossible happened. The injured man woke up slowly, his green eyes meeting hers in a connection that transcended all the surrounding circumstances. He blinked a few times, trying to focus his vision, and when he finally saw her leaning over him, something changed in his expression. It wasn't fear or revulsion, but a genuine curiosity mixed with gratitude. With effort, he managed to sit up in the seat, a grimace of pain crossing his face as he moved his neck. "You saved me," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. He looked at the farmer with the shotgun, and then back at her. "This woman pulled me out of the car when she could have just kept going." The businessman, owner of one of the largest fortunes in the metropolitan area built through smart investments in technology, had no idea who she really was at that moment. All he saw was a woman who had risked her own safety to help a stranger. His wealth, accumulated over the years through successful businesses and stock market investments, had taught him to recognize character when he saw it. "Mister, you don't understand," the farmer tried to explain, still wielding the gun. "This woman is wanted by the police. She escaped from the county jail a few days ago." The millionaire observed her face more closely, noticing the genuine fear in her eyes, but also a dignity that couldn't be broken even by the most adverse circumstances. There was something in her expression that intrigued him deeply, a vulnerability mixed with an inner strength that awakened an instinctive protectiveness in him. "Even so," he said, addressing the farmer but keeping his eyes on her, "she helped me when she could have left me to die. That counts for something." He paused, feeling a sharp pain in his head. "I need to go to the hospital, and she's coming with me. If she really did something wrong, the appropriate authorities will decide her fate. The tension in the air was palpable. The farmer hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but the businessman's natural authority and his well-known social position in the area weighed on his decision. Reluctantly, he lowered the shotgun. During the drive to the city, she remained silent for long minutes, still processing the fact that she had been defended by a complete stranger. When she finally found the courage to speak, the words came out in a torrent, as if a dam had broken inside her. She told him about the night her life had completely collapsed. She worked as a night janitor in a commercial building downtown, a humble but honest job that allowed her to support herself with dignity. It was a simple life, without luxuries, but she was proud of the work she did, until everything changed on one fateful morning. She explained how she had been accused of stealing important documents from one of the offices she cleaned, papers containing confidential information about corporate mergers and acquisitions. The official version said that she had used her access as a cleaning employee to photograph the documents and sell them to the competition. But she swore on everything she held sacred that she had never done such a thing. The businessman listened to her with growing attention, especially when she mentioned specific details about the building's security system. How would a simple janitor know so many technical details about alarms and cameras if she hadn't actually worked there? Her story began to gain credibility in his analytical mind, accustomed to evaluating risks and opportunities in his businesses. When they arrived at the hospital, he insisted that she be examined too, noting the injuries on her feet and arms caused by the escape through the woods. While they waited for treatment, she continued to recount the details of her trial, and each word only increased his suspicion that there was something deeply wrong with the whole situation. 3 days had passed since the accident, and the businessman couldn't get her story out of his head. There was something about the way she described the events that bothered him deeply. Using his influence and contacts, he gained access to the case files, and the more he read, the more inconsistencies he found. The trial had been conducted with suspicious speed, and the evidence presented seemed too convenient. He decided to pay a visit to the commercial building where she worked. Feigning interest in renting space, he talked to the building manager about security procedures. What he discovered left him even more intrigued. The surveillance system had malfunctioned on the very night of the alleged crime, and only the cameras on the floor where the theft occurred had stopped working for 2 hours. Meanwhile, she was hiding in a small motel on the outskirts of town, using the money he had discreetly placed in her hand at the hospital. At every noise in the hallway, her heart raced, expecting police officers to break down her door. The fear was constant, but there was something more disturbing growing inside her, a deep gratitude for this man who had no reason to believe her word. It was when he appeared at her door on the 4th night that she realized how important his presence had become to her. He carried a folder full of documents and a determined expression she hadn't seen before. They sat on the small, uncomfortable bed in the room, and he began to show her the discrepancies he had found. "Look here," he said, pointing to a specific page. "Your defense attorney presented only 3 witnesses, and all of them confirmed that you had access to the documents, but none of them actually worked the night shift. How could they know your routine?" She studied the papers with wide eyes. During the trial, she had been so shaken and confused that she hadn't paid attention to these details. Now, seeing everything organized, she began to understand how she had been manipulated. The very man who was supposed to defend her seemed to have worked against her interests. "There's more," he continued, turning a few pages. "The documents you allegedly photographed contained information about an acquisition that my company was considering at the time. Someone actually sold this information to our competitors, costing us millions in lost business." The revelation hit her like a punch to the stomach. Not only had she been falsely accused, but the crime actually happened, and someone had profited from her misfortune. Tears of anger and frustration began to stream down her face, and he instinctively reached out to comfort her. The touch was electric. They both felt the instant connection, an attraction that went far beyond the circumstances that brought them together. She quickly pulled away, remembering her precarious situation. She couldn't afford to feel anything for anyone, especially for a man whose world was completely different from hers. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion. "Why are you risking your reputation for a fugitive you barely know?" He hesitated before answering, searching for the right words. "Because I know how to recognize when someone is telling the truth. And because," he paused significantly, "because something about you makes me want to be a better person than I am." The confession hung in the air between them, laden with a tension that neither of them knew how to handle. He stood up abruptly, as if trying to break the moment of intimacy that was forming. "I need to investigate more, especially your attorney. There's something very wrong with the way he conducted your defense." He took the papers back, avoiding her gaze. "I'll get you a safe place to stay while this is happening. This motel isn't suitable." 2 days later, she found herself in an isolated cabin on his rural property, a place he used occasionally to escape the pressure of business. It was simple but comfortable, surrounded by native forest and far from any main road. To anyone who passed by, she would be introduced as a new domestic worker, a story that would explain her presence without arousing suspicion. The solitude of the place was both a relief and a torture. Relief because she could finally sleep without fear of being discovered. Torture because every minute she spent there made her think more about him. When he appeared to bring supplies or update his findings, the tension between them became almost unbearable. During one of these visits, he brought worrying news. He had managed to get a meeting with her former lawyer, pretending to seek legal representation for his company. The man had been evasive when questioned about her case, and some of his answers contained obvious contradictions. "He knows something," the businessman said, pacing the small cabin room like a caged lion. "But he's too smart to give himself away easily. I need a different approach." She watched his movements, noticing how the concern for her case was affecting him. He had lost weight in recent weeks, and his expensive clothes couldn't hide the dark circles under his eyes. She felt a wave of guilt as she realized how she was ruining his life just for accepting his help. "Maybe I should turn myself in," she said softly. "You've already done more than I could expect from anyone. I don't want your life to be ruined because of me." He stopped abruptly and turned to face her, his green eyes shining with an intensity that made her recoil instinctively. "Don't ever say that," he said, his voice laden with an emotion she couldn't completely decipher. "I won't let you pay for a crime you didn't commit, no matter what it costs." The determination in his voice moved her deeply, but it also frightened her. She was beginning to realize that his feelings for her went far beyond simple compassion or a sense of justice. And what was most terrifying was that hers for him were growing in the same proportion. The next morning, he arrived earlier than usual, bringing with him a somber expression that immediately alerted her that something had changed drastically. He carried a brown envelope in his hands, and his fingers trembled slightly as he placed it on the table. "I found something," he said, his voice tense. "Something that changes everything we thought about this case." She approached slowly, her heart beating erratically. Whatever the contents of that envelope, she knew instinctively that nothing would ever be the same. The envelope contained photographs that made her blood run cold. Images of her former cleaning supervisor entering and leaving the lawyer's office at odd hours, always carrying a brown folder, identical to the one that contained the stolen documents. There were also bank records showing substantial deposits into the account of the man who was supposed to defend her, amounts that coincided exactly with the dates after her trial. "They worked together from the beginning," she murmured, her hands shaking as she held the photographs. My own supervisor set me up, and the lawyer who was supposed to defend me was on their side. The businessman watched her reaction with a mixture of anger and protectiveness that surprised him. Seeing the raw pain stamped on her face awakened a fury in him that he had never experienced, not even when he lost millions in unsuccessful deals. This injustice was personal, intimate, and he felt as if every tear she shed was a direct affront against him. The supervisor had full access to the security codes. He continued, forcing himself to keep his voice controlled. She knew your routine perfectly. She knew exactly when you would be on other floors of the building. It was easy for her to enter the office, photograph the documents, and then plant evidence pointing to you. She slumped into a chair, the weight of the betrayal being greater than she could bear. The woman she trusted, who had trained her when she started the job, who had always been kind and understanding, had deliberately destroyed her life to protect her own crimes. "But why me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why choose me as the scapegoat?" He knelt next to the chair, his green eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her momentarily forget to breathe. "Because you were perfect for the role they needed. A humble employee, without the resources for an adequate defense, without social connections that could question the evidence. They counted on you accepting a deal and disappearing quietly." His proximity was stirring her senses in a way that frightened her. She could feel the heat emanating from his body, perceive the subtle scent of his expensive cologne, mixed with his natural masculine smell. When he reached out to wipe away a tear that ran down her face, she couldn't pull away. The touch was soft, almost reverent, and lasted only a few seconds before they both realized the intimacy of the gesture. He pulled back quickly, clearing his throat with embarrassment, while she felt her cheeks burn in a way that had nothing to do with shame. "I need to confront the supervisor," he said, switching back to business mode as a way to break the growing tension between them. "But I have to be careful. If she realizes we've discovered the truth, she may destroy evidence or run." During the following days, he developed a meticulous plan. Using his position and influence in the business world, he managed to get a meeting with the manager of the building where she worked, claiming interest in hiring cleaning services for his companies. It was a way to have access to the location and observe the supervisor without arousing suspicion. Meanwhile, she remained in the cabin, torn between the growing hope that her innocence would be proven and the paralyzing fear that something would go wrong. Worse still was the way her thoughts constantly returned to him, to the gentleness of his hands when he comforted her, to the fierce determination in his eyes when he promised that he would help her. She had never felt anything like this for any man. Her previous relationships had been simple, based on compatibility and convenience. But what she felt for him was something completely different, an attraction that went far beyond the physical, an emotional connection that left her vulnerable in a way she didn't know how to handle. On the third night of his absence, she was walking on the small porch of the cabin when she saw the headlights of his car approaching along the dirt road. Her heart leaped, but when he got out of the vehicle, she immediately realized that something was wrong. His movements were tense, and he constantly looked over his shoulder as if he expected to be followed. "We have a problem," he said, as soon as he entered the cabin, closing the door more forcefully than necessary. "The supervisor suspects something. During my visit to the building, she observed me with an attention that went beyond professional curiosity. I have the impression that someone warned her about my investigations. The news hit her like a bucket of cold water. If the supervisor was alert, it meant they had little time before she took steps to protect herself. Worse still, if she really had contacts who informed her about the investigations, it meant that the network of corruption was larger than they imagined. "What are we going to do?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the panic that was beginning to form in her chest. He began to pace the room, his steps echoing in the silence of the night. I need to speed up the process. I'm going to contact the supervisor directly, pretending that I'm interested in making a deal with her. Maybe she will give herself up if she thinks she can profit from it. It's too dangerous, she protested, rising from the chair where she was sitting. If she is really involved in all of this, she will not hesitate to do something against you too. He stopped pacing and stared at her, and she could see the ruthless determination that had made him one of the most successful businessmen in the region. His fortune had not been built only with luck, but with an ability to take calculated risks that others would not dare to face. I have no choice, he said simply. Every day that passes is one more day that you live as a fugitive. I can't accept that. The way he said those words, with a conviction that went far beyond simple justice, made something move inside her chest. Without thinking about the consequences, she approached him until they were inches apart. "Please be careful," she whispered, her hands finding his arms almost on their own. "I don't know what I would do if something happened to you because of me." The confession slipped out before she could stop it, revealing feelings she had been trying to hide even from herself. He stood still for a moment, his eyes searching hers as if trying to decipher what was really happening between them. When he finally leaned in to kiss her, it wasn't an impulsive gesture, but something inevitable that had been building since the moment they met. The kiss was soft at first, almost hesitant, as if they both knew they were crossing a line from which there would be no return. But when she responded, threading her fingers through his hair, all hesitation vanished. The kiss deepened, charged with weeks of repressed tension, of shared fear, of a connection that transcended all the social barriers and circumstances that separated them. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between what he felt for her and what his rational mind said about the impossible situation they were in. "This shouldn't have happened," he murmured, but without pulling away. "You're vulnerable, and I'm taking advantage." "No," she interrupted, placing a finger over his lips. "Don't you dare diminish what I feel for you. I may be in a difficult situation, but I know very well what's happening in my heart." The moment was interrupted by the sound of a car approaching on the road. They both froze, fear instantly replacing the intimacy they shared. He moved quickly to the window, peering through the curtains carefully. "I don't recognize the vehicle," he said, his voice tense. "And it's too late for a casual visit?" The car parked silently in front of the cabin, and she felt her heart leap when she recognized the silhouette that emerged from the vehicle. It was the supervisor herself, accompanied by a man she had never seen before. The woman who had destroyed her life was there, just yards away, and she had nowhere to run. "How did she find us?" she whispered, gripping his arm tightly. He kept his eyes fixed on the window, observing the movements of the unexpected visitors. "She must have followed my movements. Or maybe she has contacts who informed her about this property." His voice was controlled, but she could feel the tension in every word. The supervisor approached the door with firm steps, as if she had every right to be there. When she knocked, it wasn't the hesitant touch of someone insecure, but the decided knocks of someone who had a clear purpose. She waited for them to answer, knowing exactly who she would find on the other side. "I know you're in there," the familiar voice said through the wooden door. "We need to talk. All of us." He exchanged a tense glance with her before heading to the door, keeping the security chain in place while opening it only a crack. "What do you want?" The supervisor smiled, but there was no warmth in her expression. It was a calculated, dangerous smile. "I want to propose a deal that benefits all of us. I can resolve her problems once and for all, but I need something in return." "What kind of deal?" he asked, although he knew that any proposal coming from that woman would be suspect. "Let me in, and I'll explain everything. My friend here is an attorney, and he brings documents that can clear her name completely. But I need to ensure that certain information remains confidential." She moved closer to him, whispering urgently in his ear. Don't trust her. If she's here, it's because she wants something that only you can give. She probably wants you to stop investigating in exchange for forging my innocence." He nodded almost imperceptibly, but opened the door anyway. He knew he needed to find out exactly what the supervisor was planning, and the only way would be allowing her to speak. However, he remained alert for any sign of danger. The supervisor entered, followed by the man accompanying her, their eyes scanning the simple interior of the cabin with barely disguised disdain. When she saw the former employee, her smile widened in a way that made her blood run cold. "Hello, dear. I missed you at work," she said with false cordiality. "Although I have to admit that your absence has made certain things much easier for me." "Why did you do this to me?" she managed to ask, although her voice trembled with contained emotion. "I trusted you. You taught me everything about the job. You treated me like your daughter." The supervisor laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Exactly for that reason, my dear. You were too naive. You trusted everyone. It was very easy to manipulate you to be in the right places at the right times. And when I needed a scapegoat, you were conveniently available." The businessman stepped forward, interposing himself between the two women. "Enough games. What do you really want?" The attorney accompanying the supervisor opened his briefcase and withdrew an official document. "My client is willing to confess that she committed the theft alone, completely exonerating your protégé. In exchange, you must immediately stop any investigation into this case and sign a non-disclosure agreement that will prevent you from sharing any information you have discovered." She felt a confused mixture of hope and distrust. The possibility of having her name cleared was there, within reach, but there was something in the proposal that sounded too false to be true. "And why would you do this now?" asked the businessman, clearly thinking the same thing. "Why turn yourself in after managing to get away with it for so long?" The supervisor exchanged a quick glance with the attorney before responding. "Because I discovered that there are other people investigating the case, people with much more resources and influence than you. It's better to control the damage now than to wait for everything to come to light in an uncontrolled way." It was then that she realized the lie. The supervisor wasn't there to confess out of altruism or remorse. She was trying to silence the only person who had discovered the truth before other investigations reached the same conclusions. The deal was a desperate attempt to buy his silence. "There are more people involved, aren't there?" she said suddenly, the pieces of the puzzle fitting together in her mind. "You're not just protecting yourself. You're protecting other important people, people who have a lot to lose if the truth comes out." The supervisor's face hardened, and for the first time since she arrived, she seemed genuinely worried. "You've always been too smart for your own good. Maybe you should accept the deal and stop asking questions." The businessman crossed his arms, his posture making it clear that he would not be intimidated. "And if I refuse? What happens then?" "Then," said the attorney in a dangerously calm voice, "it will be very difficult to prove her innocence. In fact, new evidence may emerge, evidence that will incriminate her even more deeply." The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. They were being blackmailed, forced to choose between accepting an imperfect solution or risking her situation getting even worse. But it was at that moment that something happened that no one expected. The businessman's phone rang, and when he answered, his expression changed drastically. After a few minutes of tense conversation, he hung up and turned to the group with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're too late," he said calmly. "I just received a call from a federal prosecutor. Apparently, the accounting firm you used to launder the money from the stolen documents is being investigated for tax evasion. They found records of all the payments, including those that were made to you." The supervisor's face paled visibly, and the attorney began to quickly put the documents back in his briefcase. "That doesn't prove anything," he murmured, but his voice had lost all its previous confidence. "Actually, it proves everything," continued the businessman. Because I have already given the authorities all the evidence I collected, including the photographs of you two meeting and the suspicious bank records. The federal investigation has only confirmed what I already knew. She watched the scene unfold with a mixture of shock and growing relief. Finally, after so much suffering, the truth was coming to light. But there was something else in his demeanor that intrigued her, a confidence that suggested he had planned this moment carefully. "You have two options," he said, addressing the two visitors. "You can fully cooperate with the authorities and maybe get a deal that reduces your sentences, or you can continue denying and face the full force of federal law." The supervisor looked around desperately, like a cornered animal looking for a way out. "You don't understand the consequences of what you're doing," she said, her voice sharp with panic. "There are powerful people involved in this, people who won't like seeing their names exposed at all. Then maybe they should have thought about that before destroying the life of an innocent person," he replied coldly. In the months that followed, the case unfolded exactly as he had predicted. The federal investigation revealed a network of corruption that spanned several companies in the region, involving the sale of confidential information and manipulation of public tenders. The supervisor and the corrupt attorney were just the tip of the iceberg of a much larger scheme. She was officially exonerated of all charges, her criminal record completely cleared. The state even offered financial compensation for the time she spent unjustly imprisoned, but the money seemed irrelevant compared to what really mattered, having her dignity and freedom back. Throughout the legal process, he was by her side, supporting her at every hearing, at every testimony. What had begun as an act of compassion had turned into something much deeper. They could no longer imagine their lives apart. When everything finally ended, he took her back to the cabin where they had taken refuge during the most difficult moments. But this time, it wasn't as fugitives, it was as two people who had faced the worst together and discovered that the love they felt for each other was stronger than any adversity. "I've thought a lot about what you said that night," he said, holding her hands as they watched the sunset through the window. "About how I've become a better person because of you. The truth is, you've taught me what really matters in life." She smiled, finally allowing herself to feel the full happiness that had been denied for so long. "And you taught me that there are people willing to fight for justice, even when it doesn't directly benefit them." 6 months later, they were married in a simple ceremony, surrounded only by their closest friends. He used part of his fortune to create a foundation that helped wrongfully accused people get adequate legal representation, while she went back to school, determined to become a lawyer so she could help others who went through the same situation she faced. Their story became a testament that true love can blossom even in the most unlikely circumstances, and that justice, although sometimes delayed, always finds a way to prevail. Together, they built not only a relationship based on passion and companionship, but also a shared purpose of making the world a more just place for all. If you liked this wonderful story, please comment, giving a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. And if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.